This week's Torah portion is Parashat Terumah. It departs dramatically from the first two-thirds of Sefer Shmot, the book of Exodus. Up until now, we have been reading this epic story of Bnei Yisrael's redemption from Egyptian bondage. But from this point on, for the next 5 weeks, we'll be reading about the construction of the Mishkan, the portable tabernacle in which Bnei Yisrael would serve God and offer sacrifices until a permanent temple, the Beit HaMikdash, would be built by King Solomon many years later. The word Terumah itself does not have a precise English definition or translation. Some chumashim, such as the Eitz Chaim Chumash, translate Terumah as gift. Others translate it as offering. Still others translate it as portion or separate portion. But the word Terumah actually comes from the Hebrew verb leharim, which means to lift up or to elevate. Incidentally, that same shoresh, that same root, is also connected to the name of the conservative movement's camping arm, Camp Ramah. Ramah means heights, comes from the verb leharim. Rashi points out that the word Terumah literally means separating out something for God. The Terumah gift offering consisted of a portion of one's financial resources that was separated out and specifically designated for a higher purpose. The Hebrew word that Rashi uses for the noun separating out is Hafrashat. And the word that he uses for the verb to separate out is lehafrish. This very same Hebrew word, lehafrish, is used in the special blessing that is said when performing the mitzvah known as Challah. Hafrashat Challah, the mitzvah, the Jewish spiritual practice of taking Challah, refers to the religious obligation of taking off a piece of dough, burning it, or otherwise throwing it away. The bracha, the blessing that is said before baking the bread and burning the separated piece of challah, is Baruch atah Hashem Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehafrish challah min ha'isa. Blessed are you, our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with the commandments and commanded us to separate challah. This blessing is said after kneading the dough before braiding it, before it even rises. It's not necessary to say this bracha and to observe this mitzvah every single time you bake dough. Only when you're baking a large amount of bread, cake, or cookies that are made of one of the 5 grains, wheat, oats, rye, spelt, and barley, the same 5 grains that constitute chametz, incidentally, and also the same 5 grains from which matzah is made. But how large is large? I said that you only have to say this blessing when you have a large amount of dough. What constitutes a large amount? The Torah describes the mitzvah of Challah, Hafrashat Challah, in Parashat Shlach Lecha. It doesn't specify any amounts there, though. Although the Torah doesn't specify the amount, though, there's a whole tractate in the Mishnah and in the Talmud Yerushalmi that's called Challah. It's the 9th tractate of Seder Zraim, and it does address this issue of size, amount. In the Mishnah, Masechet Challah, Chapter 1, the rabbis teach that we're only obligated to observe this mitzvah of separating challah when baking more than 5 rivaim of flour. And depending on your definition of reva, this translates to somewhere between 3 to 5 pounds of flour. So how large should the separated piece of challah be? Neither the Torah nor the Talmud specify an exact amount of dough that must be separated out, but in Israel there's a widely observed custom to take a kazayit out. Kazayit means the size of an olive. And what do you do with this piece of dough once you separate it out, once you do this act of hafrashat? In the days of the Beit HaMikdash, the separated piece was given to the Kohen, the priest. He had to be actually in a state of ritual purity, tahara, when he ate it. Today, we don't give the challah to a Kohen for a couple of reasons. First of all, in contemporary times, we're unable to verify the lineage of a Kohen beyond any shadow of a doubt. And in any event, we also have lost the ability to be completely tahor, to be completely ritually pure, because the temple no longer exists. So rather than giving this separated piece of dough to a Kohen, we destroy it by burning it to the point that it is inedible, or throwing it out in some other way, but with kavanah, with intentionality. Sometimes if you walk into a kosher pizza store, you might see a crisply burned ball of dough resting on top of the oven. This is the separated challah. Now, of course, the most important question to ask about the mitzvah of challah is why? What is the purpose of this ritual, of this Jewish spiritual practice? Let me share with you a few reasons, a couple of purposes behind this mitzvah. First of all, this act of Hafrashat Challah, of separating out Challah, establishes a bond between us, the common folk, and the Kohanim, the priests of yesteryear, the ones who were the original recipients of Challah. The Kohanim, by virtue of the fact that they were deeply involved in the service of the Beit HaMikdash, were unable to engage in farming or any type of procuring of food on a regular basis. So Challah, Terumah, and other gifts that the Kohanim received, that's what enabled them to have sustenance as they performed their religious work in the temple. Another reason for observing the mitzvah of Hafrashat Challah is that it connects the mundane act of food preparation to a much higher purpose. Just like the Terumah offering that was physically lifted up from this week's Torah portion. As I did mention earlier, the very word Terumah comes from the verb leharim, which means to lift up or to elevate. The people in Parashat Terumah were asked to contribute their gold and silver and other resources and to elevate these mundane resources so that they would have a place in what would become this sacred space, the Mishkan. The Terumah gift offering was considered to be a gift of sorts to God, given out of a desire to help build God's sanctuary and to invite God's Shekhinah, God's presence, to dwell in the space that was created. As it says in Parashat Terumah, "Ve'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham." God commanded the Israelites to build a holy place so that God's presence, the Shekhinah, would dwell within it and within them. Like the mitzvah of Terumah, the mitzvah of Hafrashat Challah, separating Challah, reminds us to strive for a holy lifestyle, and it enables us to bring godliness into the world, as well as to bring more blessings into our homes and into our lives. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom.